Good morning. I'm Jessica DeGantic, Vice President of Events for the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. Thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion, Blockbuster or Bust, a new lesson in film history with industry insider and expert Kevin Goetz. His firm, Screen Engine ASI, conducts research for a majority of all movies that are widely released in America and around the world. And his upcoming book, Audience-Ology, How Moviegoers Shape the Films We Love, is available for pre-order from Chevalier's bookstore, and we'll post the link to his book in the chat in just a moment. And for our audience, we'll be taking your questions in about 35 minutes. You can submit your questions by using the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen and entering them in the questions section, and I'll get to as many of those questions as possible in about 35 minutes. And now, Kevin and Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn this conversation over to both of you and join you back in about 35 minutes with some questions from our audience. Thank you so much. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Lord, thank you so much for having me. And it's thrilling to not only be here today, but to be on the board of this incredible organization. Shout out to LA World Affairs Council and Town Hall.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm excited for this talk, so I'll let you guys get started, and I'll see you in a bit.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Andy. How are you?
I'm so good, and as I always tell everybody, in my next life, I want to come back as Kevin Goetz.
Oh, God.
Kevin has done it all twice. He really has. He's incredible. He basically is the king of movie research. I actually came to know about Kevin when I was a film reporter at Variety, and back then, in the mid to late 90s, when he was working at NRG. And I think at that point, we reporters were kind of considered the enemy because we would always try to figure out what you guys were doing. And I know you didn't like that so much. It was, it's always been a little secretive, but I was actually not one of the people that tried to sneak into the test screenings. Anyway, the book.
Andy.
Anyway, and then in 1996, I married a woman by the name of Terry Press, who is kind of a marketing genius and marketing executive, great marketing executive, and of course, she worked with Kevin on many movies at Disney, DreamWorks, CBS Films, everywhere. And so then I got to kind of know Kevin on a personal level, and then he and I discovered that we had a love of cigars, martinis, scotch, old movies, old music. And so he and I, we even have the same birthday, and we're like brothers. So here is the wonderful, and so he has written this absolutely terrific book. It is so great, Audience-Ology, How Moviegoers Shape the Films We Love. And it's really great if you are actually in the movie industry, you'll find it absolutely fascinating because he really pulls back the curtain on stuff that, again, I'm someone who grew up in Hollywood. I covered Hollywood, and there's a lot of stuff in here that I never knew. And if you're an outsider and you aren't in the business, you will still find it incredibly fascinating how some movies that you've seen actually were shaped by test screenings. And Kevin was very much responsible for a lot of that. He did write it with Darlene Hayman, his co-writer. And anyway, Kevin, why don't you tell me, because again, I know that this was always sort of a secretive world. Why did you decide to write the book now? What brought you to it?
Funny, thanks, Andy. It was, originally conceived as a textbook so that I could use it as a teaching platform when I went to do these sort of guest artist seminars, excuse me, at the major film schools like USC, UCLA, AFI, North Carolina School of the Arts, NYU, et cetera.
I think you did some for Terry, by the way, right? When she at UCLA, right?
Yes,
of course.
Yes, for several years. And what I tend to do, what I wanted to do is to say, here is a definitive look at this area that so many people love hearing about. And there was no kind of one source to go and learn about this area, of very key area of post-production, and was so influential to so many movies. And so I had lunch with Sherry Lansing maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, and I was telling her about the book, and she said, honey, this is so much more than a textbook. This could be more of a sort of a Malcolm Gladwell type of of book, whereby you're getting under the skin and more of a sort of psychological, sociological, anthropological kind of look at audiences and how they affected the movies that we see. And so that got Darlene and myself thinking about how we could use that that added sort of peeling back the onion, scenario and put it into the book. And that's when we set out to sort of change the tonality of it and make it more of a every person read, as opposed to a, more of a stuffy textbook, if you will.
Well, yeah, that's what I said. I mean, this book can be read by anybody who wants it. Again, if you're in the industry, you don't know a lot of the stuff. I didn't know many of the things in here reading it, and it was a real eye opener, and just so interesting. So I think some of the people on today, I'm sure many of them, explain how you got into this field, because you've done so many things. You were an actor. You did a lot of things, and you still do a lot of things, but obviously, this is your love. And so tell us how you got into this, because it's kind of a great story.
Well,
and go back as far as you want, because it's it's great.
Thanks, Andy. So, I was a child actor. I worked when I was starting as a youngster, single digits, working on the stage, and then I started getting my first professional gigs when I was a teenager, mostly doing television commercials. I had my red afro, and everyone compared me to sort of Opie or Ron Howard, even though he didn't have an afro, but it was nonetheless got me work, and and I sort of made my living doing that for a while. And then I was a singer and a dancer and so forth. So that was my trajectory. And then I went to Mason Grove School of the Arts at Rutgers, which was and is still considered one of the best acting conservatories in the country, and got my BFA there. And it was very intense. When I got out, I went to New York. I worked a little bit on the stage in New York and around the area, as well as doing more television, and said I want to go to California to give it a shot. So I went to California to do a contract at a theater in the Central Coast of California. And while I was there, my commercial residual sort of ran out. And at the end of the contract, I drove down in my Mercury LN7 that my parents had lent me money for, and I started in Los Angeles with $300 and an apartment from one of the gals who was a performer. It was $172 a month in North Hollywood, an apartment that was 36 years ago or something like that, 35 years ago. And from that point, I needed to eat and pay my rent in subsequent months. So I started doing a battery of things. And one of them was selling typewriter ribbons. And that lasted about 5 days. And one was catering. I catered for a year or two. And the other one was working in an answering service. Remember, with beepers, you would call the answering service and they would say, so-and-so's line and blah, blah, blah. And I remember talking to my friend saying, this is for the birds. I don't like doing this. She says, well, I have a cool part-time job. This is a girl that I grew up with, Matoka Singletary. I grew up with her in East Brunswick, New Jersey. And she said, this is a really cool company. They test movies. And I didn't know what that meant. And they're looking for people that can check people in and do that sort of thing. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I went and interviewed and got the job right there. And I think I worked that night, and it was cool. You got to see the movie. I got to see the movie in that particular. It was The Lost Boys, Joel Schumacher directed. And it was in, a Bookstar in Studio City. That was a movie theater.
Right.
And that's where the screening took place. And it was a part-time job. Didn't know anything about a one sheet, didn't know anything about advertising or tracking or any of that stuff. Didn't even know this happened with movies. But within the next couple of years, I sort of got plucked out from the chorus of the two owners of that company, Joe Farrell and Catherine Pora, who saw some potential in me, and they said, we would like you to pull our focus groups. And that's how I started. And I would watch focus groups every night of my life, watching them do them. And they were sort of masterful at them. And I would pick up things. And finally, 2 years later, my chance came to step in, like the chorus boy going on or the understudy going on for the star. And they trained me in their conference room doing a mock focus group. And I didn't know really what I was doing, but what I did know really well is how to be an actor. And so I took the role on of a focus group moderator. And from that point, I started to evolve and learn on the job for about the next 5 years, 6, 7 years, 8 years. And then I started to become the most sort of sought after moderator in the business. And in the process of that, discovered what it was like to understand the art of qualitative research, of the art of moderating focus groups. And I'm very proud of that because I'm a member of the, QRCA, the Qualitative Research Consultants Association. And, at that point, it was a matter of not only moderating, but also navigating these political minefields, because here I am, this young guy in his early 20s, and I'm with major filmmakers, and there's a lot of heightened nerves that come to the table when you're testing their baby for the first time. And so I had to learn how to get good at the politics of working with very, very temperamental folks, which kind of I knew from the theater, right? And working as the artistry of the focus group. And so that is what sort of converged to get me on my path of what I do today.
And I'm going to assume that all of your acting experience and everything probably helped with this.
Oh yeah,
with the getting in. I mean, it must have been right.
100%. And now that's an interesting story too, because that I've always thought of myself as an artist first and foremost. It's in my blood. I was born that way. I love the art of acting. I love, as I said, dance and voice. But I've appreciated learning other things that were sides of myself creatively that I hadn't explored. But on the other side of that, I was also a businessman. I started my first business when I was 17 years old. I was started a dance and acting school in East Brunswick, New Jersey. And all the Chamber of Commerce got together and gave me an award as the youngest member of the Chamber of Commerce. It was quite I remember I was on the public access channel in East Brunswick, and it was a New Jersey, and it was a big deal for me. And so I always had these, and it was successful. I had like 4 teachers and 100 students.
And I do love the story in the book, even though you weren't able to go through with it, but you were working at a video store, I believe in New York, and you wanted to buy it. I mean, this is one of the things about you.
At 22,
you worked there, and then
21.
you basically, in the book, you write about how you got to know everybody, what movies they liked, and you got a whole feel for. So you were an artist at the same time you were a businessman, and you wrote up a business plan to buy the video store, which didn't work out. But again, an incredible entrepreneurial spirit.
It didn't work out. I got fired. I went to this guy. It was a mom and pop. This is before Blockbuster came in on 79th Street and First Avenue. It was a mom and pop store. I went. I was the weekend manager. I went to this guy Lou, who was my boss, and I said, I put this plan together. I'd like to buy the store. And he fired me. And I was stunned. I was like, what? But rather than get withering or, just feeling like, oh my gosh, this is terrible, I was like, it just fueled me. It fueled me and got me further sort of wanting to, how do I say, not buy a video store, but know that I was going to kind of put everything I had into whatever it was I was going into. So I always felt like I never worried about myself in that way, because I always created opportunity for myself. And that was the key to, I think, the success that I've had in business over the years.
No doubt. Now, I want to get into the history, a little bit of the history, but before we do that, I want to go back to the, basically, I mean, again, you just brought up the fact that you've worked with, hundreds of filmmakers of renown, directors, producers, everything. and as you said, you are the in-demand person. What do you think it is about you that inspires this incredible loyalty that I know exists all over the movie industry? And you're the only, it's basically, you are the man. And what is it about you that inspires that?
Well, thank you for that. And I'm proud of that. And I think it comes from the fact that, and this is why your wife and I get along so well, we both suffer from an inability to be dishonest.
Absolutely. I will, yes.
We have a tremendous sense of candor. I try to deliver it with as much kindness as I can, but you know, the original title of the book, Andy, was called Don't Kill the Messenger.
I know.
And Simon & Schuster asked me to rethink it because they saw this as a larger issue than just me and and my story, if you will, but like more of kind of a brand, in the word Audience-Ology, coining a new phrase, right? And I kind of thought about it and said, oh, okay, obviously Don't Kill the Messenger is more salacious and maybe could even sell more books, I don't know. But what it does is talks about your question, which is, I have had to work very hard to gain the trust of filmmakers and heads of studios and the biggest producers, etc. A lot of stars who are hyphenates, who are producers also, to entrust me to take their babies, their children, and they've been working on them for years, and then the first attempt at the reality of what's going to happen, the trajectory of their movie, is in the hands of that first screening. Often it is. And that requires a certain kind of trust and a certain kind of care and nurturing. I often see myself as more of a consigliere or a rabbi or a priest, less of a,
or all of them.
Well, because people are so vulnerable. And then as the doctor afterwards coming out and having to say the results of your child are that, you know, unless you do this or this, they're going to have a chronic illness, or unless you do this, they may not even make it. But sometimes you come out and you say your child is poised to be a head of state, you know, or just the most incredible human being. So that is the reason I think that people entrust me, because they know they're going to get an honest, unbiased, you know, feedback, but they're going to get it with a sensitivity. I speak the film language. I've produced 12 movies. I've acted in so many things throughout my career. And so I know what an artist goes through. And I don't come out with a report card. I come out with numbers. I come out with data, but I do it in a way that they can hear it. And I also try to focus on what's good about something. Like, always start with that. If there's a lesson in life, in any difficult scenario, is, you know, start with something you love about that person or about that situation or about whatever it is that is in front of you. Find the good in it. There was an exercise years ago that I did in a spiritual practice, and it was looking someone in the eyes that you really didn't care for, didn't like, had a problem with, and you say, the way in which you are my perfect partner. You look at them and you say, the way in which you are my perfect partner. You don't say this aloud, you say it in your head, and everything softens. It's just kind of interesting. And having been in positions where people are very tense and very aggressive and can be not accept news well, I often find myself having to go into the kind of that Zen state and be as nurturing as I can.
And I think there's an example in the book from Alan Ladd when he talked about a screening, and they saw something, and then somebody immediately, they started off with the worst stuff about
Yeah.
what had gone on, and he says, no,
That's right.
you can't do that. I mean, it's an
It
age-old.
was Mel
Right.
Brooks. Mel Brooks
Oh, right. Right.
couldn't hear the news at all, because the person presenting came back and was saying kind of more went in for some of the negatives first, not according to the person that I spoke to, but according to Laddie.
Right. I know. I think you had two versions of that story, I think, in the book.
Which, by the way, was not the first in the book. There's many people who have given their feedback, given their point of view, and then someone else gave their point of view, and the truth is usually right in the middle somewhere.
Yes,
very
absolutely. Well, I'd love to just get into, because again, I'm sure everybody is very interested in the history of how this started. I can remember, I grew up in Pacific Palisades out here, and I remember we had a wonderful little theater called the Bay Theater, and they would have the previews there, and it was just on the thing would say, preview tonight. There was nothing. They didn't round up anybody, and people would just show up. And I remember my father, who was a screenwriter, wrote a Bob Hope movie called Cancel My Reservation, which I think that successfully sealed the end of Bob Hope's movie career. But anyway, my dad said, do you want to go? Do you want to come with me? We're having a screening out at Topanga of Cancel My Reservation. And so he took me out there, and Bob Hope was there. And he introduced me to Bob Hope, and he said, Bob, I want you to meet my son, because he's always wanted to meet another comedian besides his grandfather Groucho. And then Bob Hope looked at me and he goes, oh, is there one? Which, of course, he didn't probably think that. But that, I remember even going with my dad to these screenings. So anyway, please, and you and I have talked about how even the Marx Brothers, in making their movies, did a little bit of research. So,
well, you have a wonderful story, Andy. If we could just on, I believe it was Night at the Opera, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. Well, there's actually two stories. Night at the Opera, because Kevin talks about how some of the comedians like Buster Keaton would take snippets from their movies and they would screen them. But the Marx Brothers, and I don't think many people know this, before they made A Night at the Opera, the script was written, and Irving Thalberg, who was running the MGM at that time, or he had a division, he came up with the idea of, I'm going to send the Marx Brothers on a road trip for 1 month. We're going to tour the country, and we're going to do the comedy scenes from A Night at the Opera, do research, get feedback. And the most important thing, though, that they got out of this was they knew how to time the scenes to the laughs. So when they got back and shot it, they did it to how they remembered. And that's why when you see A Night at the Opera now, the audience can be rip-roaring laughter, but you never miss a line of dialogue because it was shot so perfectly. And then the other Night at the Opera story is when the movie was done.
Oh, I love the story.
Irving Thalberg, they all went down to Long Beach.
Groucho and Louis B. Mayer really disliked each other, didn't they?
Yeah, so Louis B. Mayer, who was running MGM, obviously, he and Groucho absolutely hated each other. They insulted each other. Groucho would insult him. He was like out of one of the movies, and he would insult him. And so fortunately, Irving Thalberg had his own division at MGM, and he was like the boy genius. And so he was able to protect the Marxes from Louis B. Mayer, who really thought the Marxes were washed up and they had come from Paramount and the whole thing. So they go to Long Beach. A Night at the Opera is done. They go to Long Beach to have a screening. Everybody is there, Thalberg, Mayer, the Marxes, everybody, the writers. They screen the movie, does terribly. They come out, and of course, Mayer is gloating over this and saying, I told you, you guys were finished. You're washed up. This movie's a flop. And then Irving Thalberg comes down carrying the cans of film of A Night at the Opera. Somehow he goes across the street where there's another movie theater that was showing Abbott and Costello. So it was a comedy crowd. He went over and he talked the guy into stopping the Abbott and Costello and running A Night at the Opera. And it went over like gangbusters. And we know the rest. Night at the Opera is considered one of the great comedies ever made. So anyway, this is about you, Kevin. So
Andy, I have to tell you something funny, though. Last night, guess where I was?
Where?
I was testing a movie in Long Beach.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, that's so funny. Well, okay. I hope it did well. I hope it did better than the first take of Night at the Opera.
It went very well. By the
Good.
way, I figured it out. I've just passed my 7,000th movie in my career. Title.
Really?
My 7,000th title in my career, working on that many movies.
Wow, that isn't well. Congratulations. Let's do that. Okay, do you want to do a little quick history, and then I want to get to what I'm sure everybody wants to know is pick one of your movies that you worked on that changed a lot to become the hit that it was through screening.
Sure.
So first do a little history, and then
this is the what's that show that he does the speed round of what is your favorite word?
Oh, you mean you mean the actor studio?
Actor studio.
Okay, right. Well, I can be that pompous if you want. I was trying not to. I was trying not to be, but if you want, I can turn on the pompous button any old time. All right, give us a quick, not quick, but just give us kind of a thing of the history of how this all came about and how it developed into what it is now, very computerized and data driven and everything.
Well, so as you said, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd would take their comedic sequences up to Hollywood Boulevard, and they would tag them onto the back end of these movies and not announce them at all. At the end of the movie, the theater manager would get up and say, "Hey, folks, we'd like to," they didn't say that Charlie is standing in the back, "We'd like to show you this and get your thoughts." And he would listen, they would listen and hear how the laughter played and or not, and then go make changes and bring them back, et cetera, et cetera. In like the 1930s and 40s, George Gallup of the Gallup poll came into into Hollywood with David Ogilvy of,
advertising, big advertising ad man, yes.
And they started to do not only screenings, but concept tests, story tests. They started to do some kind of advertising testing. Of course, advertising was nothing like it turned into. So that originally started with no comment cards, just anecdotal information, listening, hearing, and changing. Then in the 30s and 40s, when Gallup came in, it became more codified, and there were questionnaires actually used. In fact, they at the end of the screening, and they would advertise in the newspaper, special screening tonight, what it is, but no demographic sort of selection process, just whoever showed up. And then they would hand out these postcards afterwards, and people would go home, fill out the cards, and send them back, and they did. Today, can you imagine? Like, I wouldn't have any responses.
I remember going to these, yeah.
Well, so then what happened is that lasted until really the 70s. And then a guy called Joe Farrell, who worked at the Harris poll, another political poll, said, "Let me bring this to Hollywood," because Gallup had left really in the late 40s. He sort of rejected in a way. I mean, some people really embraced it, like Walt Disney and David O. Selznick and who else? There were many companies he worked with, but there were a few naysayers, and he kind of left with his tail between his legs a little bit. Gallup, I remember years later, tried to get back into the business. He was gone by then, but his company, people started to get back in the business, really work. But anyway, Joe Farrell in around 1977 grabs his sort of assistant, Catherine Pora, to come out and start this business. And so they did. And thus the new modern sort of era of research was born with a company.
Which is where you went to work.
National Research Group, and I started there in 86. But they started in 77. I think Francis Ford Coppola was one of their first clients, and they tested, I think, Apocalypse Now. But this was the time when perfect timing, perfect storm lined up, because movies like Jaws and Star Wars were released. And so what that did is changed our entire industry. This notion of the tentpole movie was born. The tentpole concept was driven because of it, like a tent holding up
everything else,
was holding up the whole slate of the rest of the movies. Now that whole paradigm has been inverted, and it's like you can't even make the small movies anymore. But throughout the 80s and the 90s, it was the tentpoles and then the smaller movies. Now it's the haves and have-nots, and everything is a tentpole movie and that is released by a studio. And that's what we're talking about mainly here. Of course, everyone tests, the streamers test, et cetera, et cetera. But going back to the to the 90s, or the 70s rather, when this change came over, where from a platform, a roadshow release or a platform release, which was a very limited release of a movie, playing in theaters, rolling out very slowly, playing in theaters for 6 months, a year.
Yeah.
Change to, let's release this all at once, and let's spend some real advertising dollars. Remember, there were 3 networks, that was it, and spend money with television advertising to sort of bring everyone to with a brand awareness of a movie within a 3 to 4 week period, go wide and see what happens. And thus everything changed. So the advent of large scale advertising being used to, to encourage people to go see a movie on a particular day was born and has never turned back. That gave a tremendous opportunity for this company, this new nascent company, National Research Group, because advertising testing, the stakes were so high. You had to know that your creative materials were really resonating with moviegoers. You had to track movies, how they were, once the advertising was now in the it was going out in the zeitgeist, in the world. How was it affecting people's intent to see the movie? So we would track movies before they opened, so we would know. We still do it today. And of course, testing the content itself, because again, the stakes were so strong. Now, what was so interesting is that what we discovered was that the single most important thing, yes, the trailer was important, the preview, yes, the television advertising commercials were important, but the single most important thing, and still to this day is the single most important thing, is word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
You could get word of mouth at a certain level. It actually correlated to your multiple. In other words, how much your movie was going to open from opening weekend, how many times over it was going to do business, because your word of mouth was so strong. So the idea in screening research was to get your definite recommend number, not probably recommend, not maybe recommend, definitely recommend. Get that number correlated to the legs that a movie had, how long it was going to stay in theaters. So the goal was to move up, to try to get that number as high as you could, because it had serious financial implications. And that's right. When I came into the business, and it had been established now by the mid 80s into the late 80s, it became, you had to do this because it was an insurance policy and gave you great comfort in knowing that you were at certain levels. And if you weren't at certain levels, that was also very telling. Perhaps you pulled back on your advertising spend because a movie was never going to have the word of mouth that it would need in order to make its money back. So you cut your losses potentially.
Well, I remember working as a publicist at Warner Brothers in the early 80s. So I was in the publicity department, and at that time, publicity was, I mean, it still is, but it was really in the early 80s that the whole ad thing shifted, where, remember, all, because all the people came, all the ad guys all were recruited by the studio, the Sandy Reisenbachs and the Joel Waynes. And I remember being a publicist, and it was kind of like, you're not really in the most important, thing anymore, because it's advertising now is much more important. And it was called Ad Pub, but it really was just ad.
And what was it before? What was it before that, Andy? It was the exploitation part.
Right. That's right. And tub thumping. That was another word. So listen. Please tell us.
I want to give a plug to Bob Levin, who's the COO of my company today, and he's another success story, because later on they started now poaching advertising executives to come and run marketing studios.
Right.
And then Bob was a tremendous example of success, but there were several folks who weren't successful. They came into the business and they imploded pretty quickly because it isn't the same business. And you had to be smart enough to know how to navigate both with the mechanics, but also with the political nature of what you were dealing with major stars and, producers and directors and people who were highly, as I said, temperamental and highly excitable, and you had to know how to manage those people took great finesse to do that.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, you finish.
No, can't be overstated. That's all.
Okay. So please give us a, kind of a insight into a movie that you worked on, that you shepherded, with your research and everything, that wasn't there at the beginning, and changes and things that were made that it came on to be, it became a huge success. Is there an example you can give us?
Yeah, I mean,
give us some details.
But I think one of the greatest examples and one of the most material effects, I think, was Fatal Attraction.
Right. Tell us about that.
A movie that most of the people listening that are over the age of 40 will appreciate. So initially, the movie was a cultural phenomenon, but it was at first a very good thriller. Okay, it was a thriller. Most of you know the story, so I won't bore you. But it was a woman obsessed, Glenn Close, with a man, Michael Douglas, who's married to Ann Archer. And so in the original movie, the movie's playing like gangbusters, just going along at a clip, and people were in it. You could feel it in the room. At the end of the movie, Glenn Close, who's kind of a real psycho, obsessed woman over this man, and can't have him, takes her own life by cutting her throat, to Madame Butterfly, I believe. Right. And you could feel the energy just sink out of the room. And then when we did the focus groups right afterwards, and the cards, the comment cards, it was like the ending. It's almost like they rehearsed it. Guys, if you didn't rate the movie higher, why didn't you? The ending. Well, we heard it in LA. We heard it in, I believe, Seattle, Atlanta, wherever. Every time we went and screened the movie, it would have the same reaction. So obviously, what are we going to do? So the notion was, and we got this from the research, what did they want? Well, they wanted the wife to have some kind of justice. The wife, Ann Archer.
Right.
And we wanted her to get her comeuppance for being such a witch, rhymes with witch. And that was and Michael made a mistake in his character, made a mistake and realized it, reconciled. So they were on board with Michael. He had screwed up and he was trying to make a, mea culpa. And so they were cool with him, but they weren't with Glenn. She never got what she wanted. And that was the easy way out in audiences' minds. So what they did was said, let's go back and give them the satisfaction the audience is asking for. So they reshot an entire ending sequence. Now, not without tremendous objection from the director, Adrian Lyne, and from Glenn Close. Michael Douglas was also a producer, I believe, on it. And he didn't object to it. He actually encouraged it. Sherry Lansing was on board completely.
Why do you think Glenn Close? Why did she not? Or Adrian Lyne? I
didn't speak to Glenn, but it's in the book because we heard this. She's been on record saying that when she did, I guess she did some, or somebody told me that was close to the production, that she had consulted her, or not her, but some psychologists, and right. They had said that the out for this woman would have been this occurrence. She would have taken her own life. She would have, taken her life by suicide. And so she was committed to that. And
but what about Adrian Lyne, who, obviously he saw that
filmmaker wants their vision intact almost always, and you have to go through a series of processes to get there. But he got there, they got there. We test the movie. Andy, in my life, I'd never seen anything like it. The audience was.
Tell us the new ending.
Well, the new ending is Glenn Close comes to Michael's house, breaks in, and he's in the bathroom, and she comes out of the shower while he's shaving, or something like that. I recall something like that. And then, she's drawing a bath, and she comes into the bathroom. Michael Douglas, and Glenn struggle, and he drowns her in the tub. And that was the comeuppance that the audience wanted. Leave my family alone, that kind of intensity. All right. But then how do you do the other part of it?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, from the water, Glenn Close comes out of the bathtub. She's not really dead, and goes after him and Ann Archer is in the bathroom door, and boom, 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 and kills Glenn. And the audience cheers, and the thing went up 25 or 30 points in its ratings. So that number, that money score of that definite recommend went up that strongly to make it a worldwide sensation. It did a few $100 million in worldwide box office in those days. It was on the cover of Time magazine.
It was a zeitgeist movie.
It was a zeitgeist, and that was absolutely a result of the screening process.
Right.
I think we want to take some questions, though. Do we not?
Okay. Do we? Yes. Is it about that time? Well,
Yes, it is. So,
okay. Well, it's been a pleasure. Let's take some questions.
perfect. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the way we like to see our villains go down. They don't get to kind of have an easy, I wouldn't say it's an easy out, but yeah.
It's probably the greatest shock moment, even beating out. Remember the scene in Wait Until Dark where the guy pops out? Remember that? And then I guess there's the scene in Carrie where the thing, but
Psycho is Hitchcock started that with the reveal of the mother. I know. But there's very few of those great ones, and the Fatal Attraction one was good. I'm sure Adrian Lyne was happy that he ended up doing the change. I'm sure they all made a ton of dough. So
I know, right? And how much do you think the rewrite cost? I mean, to refilm the thing.
That's a really interesting.
500,
I don't know exactly, but I can absolutely find it out.
But I'm sure they made much. I'm sure they made up for it.
Oh my God, it was nothing.
Right?
But Andy, it's funny. Before we go into the questions, I do want to mention that one of the things my company at Screen Engine ASI does is we are doing what we call live table reads.
Right.
Prior to the movie shooting a frame of film. So we're actually having professional actors come in, read it.
That's great.
And we can identify some of the holes or areas that were unsatisfying beforehand so that we can correct things. So we're reversing the screening process. Right.
Now tell us the truth, Kevin. Do you ever go and read one of the parts?
No.
Bring out your acting genius now? You don't do it. All right, let's go with the questions.
We got to jump in here.
This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
This first questioner says, I'm an active viewer of screeners, so I'm excited about this presentation. I noticed that the post-screening questionnaires are now presented with a burner phone. With the question, with a burner phone, like I guess, yeah.
No, a device, yeah.
Yeah, with the questions that is placed under the seats at the theater. They used to be paper forms. What are Kevin's thoughts on digital as opposed to papers for the feedback?
Okay, so we do both. We have old-fashioned paper and pencil. 2 nights ago, I did a screening in San Diego, and we used paper and pencil. And for no other reason that the client still wanted that, they were interested in that modality. The digital devices we hand out at the end are programmed to create skip logic in them, which means that we can add a lot more questions than a 2-sided questionnaire. And also, we're not wasting people's time if they say, like, if we only want people who did not rate the movie excellent, we want to know why they didn't rate it excellent. You're not having a person that rated it excellent doesn't need to see that question. So we can add a lot more and a lot more efficiently. Also, they get results back instantaneously. So if we want to know, as the questionnaires are coming in, we're getting results coming in. So we're able to, before we do the discussion group, right, I'm able to have a pretty strong picture, a dashboard of what people are saying, so I kind of know the areas to probe because of those the speed of those digital devices. But I have to say, the handwritten sentence, has a certain kind of, I don't know, depth and expression to it in certain kinds of movies, especially with people that are over the age of, say, 50. And I really prefer that often when I'm doing more of a independent or art house film that's geared for an older audience. But both work, and we do both.
Great. This questioner asks, are you still working with your brother Michael on advising filmmakers?
Okay, Michael is not my brother.
Oh.
That is Peter. There's another Kevin Goetz. That's Peter Michael Goetz's son, and he's a filmmaker. We have no relation to each other. My brother's name is Peter, and my sister's name is Lisa. Peter is opening a medical school in the Caribbean right now, his own medical school he's been working on for years. Very proud of him. My sister's a real estate agent in Bucks County and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. That's my family.
Kevin's advising her.
What'd you say?
I said, but you're advising your sister.
But
Yeah.
we definitely, because I love real estate. But no, we have no relation.
Perfect. How have you seen social justice trends or public sentiment about events like wars, national conflicts, etc., impact audience reactions to films?
Well, it's it's interesting. So there's a couple of answers to that question. If you have a movie about, let's say, terrorism, okay, and the movie is going to, it's a bomb goes off in Midtown Manhattan, let's say, and the movie was to be released in October of 2001. So 9/11 just happened. You're toast. So it's very, very akin to a political process. When a candidate is going to be elected or not elected, it hinges on one day. One day. Write-in votes are the equivalent to pre-sales in a movie, but that opening night is election night. And if you don't make your numbers, you either win or you lose. And I remember talking to Harold Ickes about this, who was Hillary Clinton's pollster in Washington, because I had a political business for about 10 minutes, maybe 15 years ago. And I said this notion of political candidates are very much, he goes, no, they're not. And I said, yeah, they are. They really are. And he said, well, how can that be? And I said, well, he said, a political candidate can have an affair the month before, you know, a thing, and before the election, and they're gone. They're DOA. And I said, well, it's the same thing for a movie. And I gave an example, not of 9/11, but of something else. It could be a plane crash, right? You have a big plane crash movie. So in that respect, a movie about Benghazi, and then you have a very, very direct correlation to affecting the success of a movie. Now, when you have a movie with a subject matter, and part two to your question, when you have a subject matter that is political in nature, Hurt Locker, or name your cause or name your war or whatever, those are challenging movies to get people to see, by and large. And the reason they are is because they have a perception of being medicinal, if you will, almost like eating spinach, as opposed to enjoying and embracing. We get too much of it in the news now. You see what I mean? It can be overcome, but you gotta find the entertainment value in everything. If it's too political, if it's too social, it's probably not gonna make it. There are exceptions. I'm gonna get emails saying, well, what about this movie and this movie? There are exceptions, but by and large, that is typically how it works. And it's because people want to pay to see a movie or see a movie on a streamer because it has some kind of fun factor. The fun doesn't have to be a good ending, a happy ending. It has to have an elevated sense of fun. I always like to say nobody wants to see a movie on any platform, whether it's in a theater or anywhere, if it's not really great. Now, there are documentaries that sometimes go beyond that, but documentaries typically don't do very big business at all. They have a very niche audience. And those people, like myself, I love documentaries. I can't get enough of certain subjects. But by and large, the general public doesn't buy into that premise.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of combine some questions that we've gotten. So can you talk about how you interact with creative people who are deeply invested in one particular vision to encourage them to appeal more to the public? Do any of them resist because they don't want to feel like they've sold out or repress their artistic messaging?
Well, I just had a very, very, very recent example of that. A person who I think is one of the most significant creative geniuses of our time, and I were on a call, And I made a suggestion after watching the movie based on the audience feedback that the audience really needs this very small thing, but would set the stage, would lay context down for what was to come. And the quote I got back was, "Over my dead body." And I went into that sort of Zen state, like, don't take it personally. I'm just the messenger giving you this, you know. And what happened was we tested the movie again, and he put it in. It went up 25 points. Never heard from him again, but it was an affront to suggest that something so small could have such an impact. But it just changed the whole tonality of the piece. He didn't want to hear it, but he did it. So sometimes they have to arrive to that answer on their own. I'm only giving them the data. I'm only giving them the audience feedback or interpreting what the audience is saying, but it's up to them to make it. And I like to say, Jessica, often, whether or not, and this helps the medicine go down, if you will, whether or not you make the change or don't is pretty immaterial to my life. It's not going to affect me. I love to see all my clients successful. I'm just passing on the information, you know? So that's how I deal with that.
This questioner asks, or says, I'm curious to know if many directors change their films back to their preferred vision for the director's cut for video or DVD, overriding what audiences preferred.
These are damn good questions, I have to say. The answer is absolutely yes. Here's what I like to say. Make the changes. The audience wants to see these changes, make them. You don't like them, go back. Especially now, it's the easiest thing in the world to restore something. Sometimes someone says the pace is too slow, but they're not really saying the pace is too slow per se. They're saying they're not engaged. That's the real intent, right? So they cut the movie too deeply and it really loses its impact. And sometimes I'll go back and say, so why don't you consider going back to where we were, to that baseline, and actually adding some scenes that provide more of that character development to keep the engagement going. It's not just about being crass. See, Andy asked me a question earlier about why do filmmakers trust me and want to work with me, and often it's because I'm trying to come up with creative solutions based on audience feedback that will get their movies to the next level, that will get their movies. And let's face it, it is not, the art form is not painting. The art form is not, it's not writing a novel. Making a movie is many artists coming together. Yes, there's the director's vision. There's also the producer's vision. The studio is now paying $100 million. They get a voice. So you have to, often my job is to have to take all of these intentions and agendas and bringing them together to create the best outcome. And the best outcome means the most commercially viable one often, not always, because sometimes I'll even say, the numbers be damned. I was in that room. I felt the energy in that room. And it's often the director's original cut that is gone back to. But I have never, in 7,000 movies, ever seen a movie get worse or test worse because of audience research. Oh, test worse, but never end worse. In other words, no one's with a brain is going to say, well, that tested worse, but I want to go with my cut anyway. I've only seen things stay the same or mostly get better.
Do you ever screen feature documentaries? Any feedback for documentary filmmakers to gauge audience reaction in post-production?
I did one last night. I did a documentary last night. It was spectacular. We have our own normative data, so our own numbers, benchmarks of where you need to perform if you're going to go theatrical release versus non-theatrical release. There's so much to gain. Documentaries are the most extraordinary genre. They're my it happens to be my favorite. It's not even a genre, but it's a favorite style, I guess, of movie making. It's the long form documentary. I also love the short form docs. And for those people out there who deprive yourselves of not seeing the Oscar shorts, the Oscar short form content, Oscar short form docs, and animated short form, they are spectacular. And when I teach at the film schools, I generally like to tell the students, run to see these. They are lessons in filmmaking, and they're so enjoyable as well. So yes, you get a lot about documentaries. Is your subject, is it too political? Is it too hard hitting? Is your person coming off the way they intended to come off from a vulnerability standpoint, or do they need to add more footage to drive a point home? That kind of thing. Tremendous amount of feedback you get in a documentary screening.
Thank you. What can films designed for streaming take away from the testing process? Does someone like Netflix, who produces so much content, need to focus on testing so much without the pressure of an election night?
Ooh, really good. Yeah, it's just not the same benchmark. The idea is audience feedback for a streamer. You're right, you take away the immediacy of the election night, but you still want to create chatter. You still want to create, we used to call it water cooler conversation. You still want to create a buzz to have people Squid Game, for example. Everyone's talking about it, that's a great thing. People are really, it's in the conversation. That's what you want in any format, in any modality, is a sense of buzz and excitement around something. So by creating the best content you can make on a streamer is only going to enhance that buzz, is only going to enhance how good something is, and people will then talk about it and buzz about it and promote it. Remember, the word of mouth is equally as strong in the streaming world as it is in any other world. Movies have a tendency to create more of a worldly zeitgeist, more of a world conversation, because there's so much out there about it, and the advertising in and of just alone makes it feel bigger and broader.
Thank you. Just one final question, because we are into politics and policy in this organization. So there have been some issues with public polling around politics, where public sentiment doesn't seem to align with what's showing in the news or online. Do you see aspects of that in cinema, where studios target films thinking there's more interest in a topic, actor, or story than there really are?
Great question. Great question. Absolutely, you do. And listen. I was humbled very much so by the during the Trump and Clinton election, because we did some fun. Not that no one got this. This was just because we are a polling organization. We have the access to polling. We absolutely I predicted Hillary would win. And by the way, what she did win was the popular vote. What we didn't do is go surgically within the states and understand how the electoral process would affect that outcome. But we did capture the popular sentiment. It's a lot easier to capture the popular sentiment than it is to predict something that has more than one component to it. In this case, needing states to, and geographically designated areas to kind of understand how that impacts. So I'll leave that to the pollsters in the future, the political pollsters. But it's, in terms of how it affects research, I fear that there's, it's a complicated subject, but I fear that by the nature of the fact of relegating the way we look at movies and television to demographically, we put people into buckets. I don't mean my company tries to not do it, but I have to sometimes, because that's what the clients want to hear and see. But by putting people into males and females, under and over a certain age, African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian. It creates divides rather than bringing people together through psychographic identifiers, things that we like and have behaviors and attitudes that are in common with each other. And I think that's the way of the future, to create content and to advertise content. And that's a whole nother subject sometime to have a conversation about on the changing landscape and how institutionalized ways of grouping people can actually have adverse effects on many things.
Well, Andy, I want to bring you back because I know we're wrapping this up. Do you have any final questions for Kevin as well? And then we'll close this out.
No, I think we pretty much. Well, I guess there's one I've always wondered. Are there examples of? Is there an example of a low testing movie that went on to be a huge hit?
War of the Roses.
Okay, which you mentioned, right?
I
in the
know
book.
there's many. Well, hold on. There aren't many. There really
right,
aren't.
right,
But there are
right.
many in my lifespan of doing what I do. Every year there's one or two that might defy because you know why? The critics might love it, and the critics have might say you're not cool if you don't love this movie, and so people psychologically get behind a movie because they're kind of told to like it. Mostly independent or art house kind of movies.
Right.
But you know, most people don't follow reviews the way we all think. They want to see what they want to see, and despite reviews, unless it's in the toilet, unless it's super high, most everything's in the middle, and it kind of is just about word of mouth. You know, I want to say though, if you want to learn more, please do buy the book. We'd love to have you buy the book on either. You said which site did you?
Chevalier's. It's the oldest bookstore in Los Angeles, and we try to support local bookstores, but I know it's available on Amazon too.
Amazon, or just wherever books are sold, I think. And tonight is my first launch party.
And let's not forget that proceeds, a portion of the proceeds from sales of the book will be donated to the wonderful Motion Picture Television Fund, which is a great place. Yes, which is a great, known as the MPTF. It's a wonderful place for people in the industry. So thank you for doing that.
And thank you for giving me this forum, and thank you for the incredible questions out there. I really do appreciate them, and I hope that you do enjoy the book if you read it. Thanks, Ika.
Thank you.
They'll enjoy it. It's great.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin, for such fascinating insights on a side of the entertainment industry that we so rarely see, and to both of you for this wonderful conversation. And as Kevin mentioned, thank you to our audience for all of your great questions. Be sure to pick up your copy of Kevin's book, Audience-Ology. There is a link in the chat. And if you'd like to support the council and programs like these and to learn about our upcoming events and membership, please visit our website at lawacth.org. We look forward to seeing you at our next event and wishing you all a wonderful Thanksgiving. Take care.